There we are. Right, good afternoon for those who have joined. Welcome to this special little webinar we're doing, a CoolCare Q&A, where it's a chance for you to answer any questions you might have and for us to take the time to, you for ask them and us to answer any questions you might have on CoolCare within this next hour we've got the time for. So those joining for using, if you've not been on one of our masterclasses before, CoolCare is here to help make operating your care home easier, more efficient and more profitable. And today we'll be doing that by answering your questions and helping you out with anything you might want to know about. So in order to get your questions to us, you can use Zoom on here. You should have the option to use the Q&A on Zoom itself. If you pop your questions in there, I'll be able to see them all, and then we'll kind of go through them one by one, answering any questions anyone's got. Anything you think of at all, should be able to go through. That's usually I say it'll be more obviously general questions on CoolCare itself. I won't be able to look at anyone's data or anything, so it won't be a chance to see anything on your system. But any general questions you've got on using the system, anything you want to know about, you can ask questions via Zoom, and we can answer anything you've got. Yeah. Any questions anyone has, just use the Q&A, and we can start getting to them once people start asking them. It's really an open forum for anyone who has any questions. I'll give you a moment to type them all up. I'm sure I should be doing now. Here we go. We've got our first question coming on from asking, how do we add a staff name against the shift rows on the Rota? That is a good question. We'll start with our rotas then. So let me just swap over to my demo system and I can show you how to do that. Right. So, there we go. So first question, looking at the rotas. How do you add a staff name against the shift row on the rota? So imagine you've got a staff member that's on a shift pattern. We want to assign them to it so we can see it on there. If I share my screen, that would be useful. So that is done through your rota under the staff section in CoolCare. Well, that's to say, as you may already know, this is our live rota in CoolCare where we can pop the staff on saying who's working on what. I actually need to take someone out of a row so I can add them back onto it. So let me just remove someone from there. So where you have a row or a shift pattern unassigned on the rota, it'll look something like this. This care assistant here, this fourth one down, this shift pattern there. To assign a staff member onto that shift pattern, essentially having them on that repeating pattern, saying they're going to be doing that going forward from there. If you click in this staff column on the left-hand side where it's currently empty on that row, it'll bring up this box for me, telling me this is a shift pattern for a care assistant. We can choose if we want to do it. We choose a start date when the person would start on that shift pattern from, which you can do retroactively or even plan it ahead in the future. But I'm just going to go with today's date for this example. And then we can choose our staff member who wants to do it. It'll be a list of all your staff that are able to do it. So in this case, it's care assistants I've chosen for the position on here. So this is all a list of all my care assistants in my home. And specifically, it will be anyone with contracted hours. So bank staff, you can't put on a full row as a shift pattern, but anyone with contracted hours on the staff record, you can choose them on here. So with it, you just pick the person you want, click on them there, or highlight them in blue, and then the assign staff button down the bottom to save it. And that will then assign them onto those shifts. The name sometimes doesn't appear in that row itself actually right away, but if you just reload the rota, go out of it, come back into it, or just refresh the page, then if I load it up again, we can now see the name on the row there as well. And that even feeds back to your rota setup as well. We should see them against that as well in there. So if you need to edit someone's shift pattern, you know who's assigned to each one to edit them on there. So hopefully that should answer your question on adding your stuff onto the rota rows on there. Like I say, it's just make sure they are staff with contracted hours, and you can put them on a shift pattern wherever you need to. So that's one. Our next question comes from Edward. Hi Sam, hopefully straightforward. Reviewing our access levels at present for our users, can the users reset their own passwords, or are they reliant upon super users to reset them? You would be correct there. It is up to super users to reset people's passwords on there. They can do that through anyone that has access to this manage users section under the menu there, which is typically, let's say, your super users that can do everything on CoolCare, can click into any user record on the list, and you can see the option there to reset their password, create a new password for them, and then that is set for them. Users at the moment can't currently reset their own passwords. I say it would be someone with the access to do it for them on there. That's important there. And a follow-up question that came onto there. Is it possible to add a level of access for managing users explicitly? So just being able to manage the users and nothing else. Suppose yes, using your user groups under the manage user groups section, you can indeed create a user group that would just be looking at the users themselves by clicking again the insert button to create the user group. If they just had needed access to manage users and see nothing else, it would literally be there, the option to manage users and user groups on there. They wouldn't even see the three sections on the left-hand side. They wouldn't see anything like that. They would literally just be on the menu, have access to manage users and manage user groups. Be warned, if you do that, just to be aware, it would also mean they could edit their own permissions and change their own access formats. Because obviously if they have access to manage users, that means they can also manage themselves who would be a user on there. That's the only caveat with that. But if they needed that access on there, you could set it up for them doing it through those. So that's that. Yes. Typically, I say at the moment users can't reset their own passwords. It would be for someone with an access to do so on their behalf. And the password they set is, let's say, the password they use going forward for it. That answers those. Our next question. When using the compare to Rota to review timesheets, what are the typical reasons that would generate an exclamation mark? Again, so we're looking at our timesheets on here. And specifically this option here, compare to Rota. When you click that button, as it says, it will compare against the Rota itself. And if you actually hover over it, it does explain a bit further. It says there, checks which staff have a planned shift each day. Warnings will appear, the exclamation marks, if A, they have a timesheet event with any standard or extra hours on a day where they don't have a rota shift. So i.e. they've worked a shift that they wasn't normally planned to do on the rota, or vice versa, they were rotated to work on a shift, but there is no event on the timesheets. So if I click that button here, we can see hopefully some examples, or a lot on mine. Goodness me. So essentially, all these exclamation marks mean is either something on the timesheet that wasn't originally planned on the rota, like this example here. This looks like a night shift this staff member did, but he had nothing planned in on the rota for that night. So that's why it's flagged it up with an exclamation mark. And vice versa, right next to him, you can see there where the shift was expected, but wasn't done. There's no hours in there, but there was a shift expected from the rota. And again, if I click into that gap there, we can actually see what they were assigned to do from the rota in there as well. Yes, you can use that button to see the differences, but it's literally just where's the difference between the rota and the timesheets if there's a shift where there shouldn't be, or where there's not a shift where there should be with those. Those would be two options on there. It won't show if there's a difference in the hours or anything else. It's literally just is there a shift, should there be a shift, essentially, is what it's looking for in that. That's hopefully answers that question. Then next one, how adding a new shift pattern. So a follow-up from our last one on the rota, adding in a new shift pattern for a new starter or a new staff member that's working now on a pattern. We can do that through, that's done through your rota setup. So under the care home section there, this is where your rota is initially created in CoolCare and where you would come to edit it to create a new shift pattern for a new starter. So first thing you'd want to do is under the group you want to add them into, click the plus shift pattern button to then be able to add in a new position. So in this case, I can just say another care assistant on here. If I click on that and save it, it adds it on as just an empty row to start with, and you might have some empty ones already with that. But if you click on the position name or in this assigned staff column or in the rota hours, essentially anywhere on this left-hand side bit, it will then bring up this box, which is the shift pattern builder. where you can then build that shift pattern that you want someone to work to. And this shift pattern builder essentially works on a number of days on versus a number of days off, going back and forth on there for any, essentially to create the shift pattern that you need to add up. So in my case, my rota actually here is a 2-week rolling rota, so I can build up to a 2-week shift pattern in there, and it can be whatever we need. So we can do it as something as simple as you need to, or as complicated as it would be on there. So if I do a shift pattern on here, we'll say we're going to do a week 1 and week 2 of this one. Say week 1, they work 2 days on, and then they're off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but then they work again on a Saturday and Sunday for their first week. And the shift definitions that you're choosing for working each shifts are the shift times that will be set up in your home setup in the background. So you should have a list of shift times in there already as you're building this. And then we can build week 2 again underneath that by using this add row button to just keep adding on rows for as many different shifts as they will be doing. You could literally go back and forth, day on, day off, if you need to, back and forth as much as you need to, as long as it adds up to your full rota length in the end. So this adds up to 14 days total in here. It tells me there the pattern fits into my full rota, and I can build it on there for them. That builds it into the rota there, you can see. So that shift pattern is then built in here. But that's only half the story. That's actually just building a shift pattern for a person to work to. In order to then assign a staff member to it, you'd have to first apply the changes on the rota here to say when that takes effect from. Essentially updating our live rota with the new shift pattern we've created. And that will ask you for a date when that takes effect from. I'm just going to do it from the earliest date I can so it can take effect right away. And if you then click Create Rota, that goes onto the staff rota section there. And from here, we've then got the new shift pattern in there down the bottom, and I can click into that staff column, as I already showed you, to pop in a start date and assign a staff member onto it. So you create the new shift pattern by adding them onto the rota setup, creating the shift pattern, and then applying the changes, and you'll have it there on the live rota to assign a staff member to it. That's your shift patterns there. The next question we got: is there a way that you can reply back to a message on CoolCare to the actual message without replying with a new message? Assuming we're talking about the staff messaging in this page here. The short answer is no. Whenever you can see when you create this message in here, you create it as a new SMS, and you can send it out to your staff members. If they do then reply to that, it goes into the box on here. But it just here was just to show you a conversation. You would, if someone did reply to your conversation from here, and then you went back to them, you would have to again add it in as a new SMS to then basically add it on as a new message onto that conversation. You can't just kind of do it straight from here. You do have to do it through the new SMS button with that. So, fortunately, not a way around that at the moment on that. So I hope that answers that one. Next one, any tips around how to manage a change on a calendar entry and that information then pulling correctly through to the timesheets? Change on a calendar entry, the information pulling correctly through to timesheets. So, for example, I'm saying we're talking about holidays, absences on here if they do change. So, essentially, whenever you save something on the calendar here, that should then update the rota and the timesheets and everything accordingly. So in terms of tips for managing it, it would just be a matter of obviously updating it whenever you need to. So I've got this holiday booked in for this staff member here for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If I want to say extend that by a day or edit the hours on there, we can click into it from here and we can update it as you can see. So if this was going to be a day longer, or even if one of these days changed for whatever reason, we can update them in there to say, one was declined at the end or change from declined to authorized, or as I say, even updating it to be another day longer on there. And I'll say, when you do change it, you will need to double check the hours in there and then the hours on the right-hand side here are what goes over to the timesheet. So if you are editing them, they're going to what's being carry over to the timesheet side of things. It's just a matter of once you save it, well then it can remove them from the rota, and as long as it's saved as authorized, it will then go over to the timesheet, no problem. And to say update anything in there as well if you do update the hours in there on that. So I'll just show you with that one updated, it's now a day longer. If I go to the timesheets, we should see they're for this week. We've got the 11 hours holiday for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But if I go to Monday, we should then see another 11 hours in there for that extra day I added in. If it changed, and actually that shouldn't have been a day longer, I need to remove those 11 hours. Again, we just go back to the calendar into here, and we can edit the holiday entry on the calendar, either by removing that day from the dates on there, or we have to set that back to requested first, and then we should be able to remove that date from there, which will remove it from the calendar entry. And if I save that again, that's fine on there, and take it back to the timesheets. Again, we got still just the 3 entries for today, but the entry that was in on the Monday will just change to 0 hours. It can't remove it completely, but it will just change it to 0 hours and set it to 0 hours. There's no longer the holiday in there. So yeah, that's how you would be able to manage to change the state. As long as you change it on the calendar and it's authorized, obviously the hours will then go across. But if you edit it, it will update the hours in the timesheet as well from there. Hopefully that makes sense on that. There. So that's that question. Ooh, going back to our compared to the Rota, the shift that was snapped to shift still had an exclamation mark. Okie dokie. If we check that again compared to Rota, talking about this one here, the one that is an exclamation mark. Yes, it's still snapped to shift, but it wasn't a shift that was planned in. So the way the shift snapping works is completely independent of the rotas. So the way shift snapping works is based on the shift definitions, i.e. your shift times set up in the, not the dashboard, excuse me, the home setup. Snapping to shift is just worrying about the times of the shift, not if they should be on a shift or not based on the rota. So the two are completely independent of each other in that sense. All the shift snapping is looking for is if they've clocked in and out around the times that are expected from the shift definitions in here. So a shift can still snap to shift even if the person isn't rotated in for it on there. So in this case, in that example, as I say, the shift wasn't one that was expected on the rota, but because they've clocked in around 7 p.m., 7 a.m. when that shift starts and ends, it still counts as snap to shift from CoolCare's point of view. The timesheet doesn't care if they're doing a shift or not. Only when it's compared to the rota will it bring that up in there. Otherwise, the timesheet would just, that's because if, for those that might not be using rotas on CoolCare, they still need them to snap to shift. So it's kind of independent of that. So yes, a shift can still snap to shift, even if it's not rotated in for it on there. So that one makes sense. Next one on there. Can we adjust an existing shift to apply its days and hours to a different position? I use a template, or if the position's role was renamed. So again, assume we're talking about these shift definitions here, or on the rota even as well. So let's say the shift times and everything are controlled by those shift definitions. So if you needed a shift time to apply to a certain position, it would need adding in through these shift definitions on there. It's not one you can kind of use as a template or just transfer on the rota itself. You would need to essentially add it through the shift definitions in order to use it on the rota setup on there. That's if a position's role was renamed, that wouldn't affect the shift times. It would just rename the position, and obviously then the shift times would still apply to that same position on there. But an extra thing you can do if you just need to do an odd one-off shift where you don't have it set up through the shift definitions is you can add in shifts ad hoc by the rota. So clicking on here, where you've got any empty spaces on the rota, if you just need to add an additional shift that isn't quite covered by your main options, or it's something like, say, slightly out of the ordinary, you can click on them from there and add them in as an ad hoc shift rather than one of the regular shift times. And then that way, say, it could be something that's different from your regular stuff that's set up without having to go through the shift definitions and create all that for them if it's just a one-off deal on there. Like it might be, say, someone starting and finishing an hour later on there for their shift. And that's then works like any others, you can click into it in there. So while you can't adjust the existing shift times through the shift definitions, you need to add it in as a new one. You can adjust the shifts kind of on an individual basis on the rota, by deleting them, replacing them, etc. With those ad hoc shifts wherever you need them. So I hope that answers that question. Next question on there. Timesheet total hours daily for staff. Why it doesn't include staff holiday hours? Why is a question I'm not qualified to answer, I'm afraid, but you are correct in that sense that yes, holiday hours do not count towards the worked hours on the timesheet there, essentially, I assume, because they're not worked hours typically for the timesheet purposes. It's just looking at the standard and extra hours to count as worked hours on there. If you did need to see those holiday hours properly counted towards it, what I recommend using instead is in your reports, this timesheet totals reports. That will accrue, we'll combine all the hours from the timesheets, regardless if they're holiday, absence, whatever they might be in there. So you can use that one instead. You choose it for a certain date range, so you could do it for say like a week or a full month, whatever it might be. So let me do this week, Monday to Friday, just to show you, and run that off as a Excel spreadsheet. And that reports, say timesheet totals, as you might guess, totals up the hours from the timesheets. And you can see it's all in one go from there. And the total hours on this one should, I believe, it counts holiday hours in there. So if we find it was Nadine, has 11 hours holiday this week, which is just a Friday because I didn't count the weekend. So she's got 11 total hours in there. So yes, the holiday hours do count in the sense if you're using it on the report here, but not on the timesheet itself. So yeah, as for why, it's not a question I'm qualified to answer, as I'm not the one who made that decision with that. But yes, if you need to see holiday hours as a total from the timesheets, use the timesheet totals reports under your staff reports page. Hopefully that makes sense. This is hopefully your questions there. And then from recruitment, when creating a new employee, will the documents transfer over to them? The answer to that question is that is actually up to you. You can choose whether CoolCare would transfer documents from applicants to the new staff record. So for anyone, just to catch them all up, new applicants in the recruitment section, you could attach documents to them. Let's use an existing one rather than setting up a new one, just to show you. But well, just says it already in there. But essentially, yes, when you create an applicant through the recruitment section on this page here, you can attach documents to their record. You can see there the insert button to actually add the document to the record. And yes, when you then go through the employment process and the recruitment section on here, you can then create the staff record from the recruitment side of things. And yes, the documents can transfer over to them. There is a setting to just decide if they would or not, which is found in your system configuration. Under the staff section on there will be, if I scroll down, this little section here for recruitment settings there, and you can see the tick box there, transfer applicant documents to the staff record upon hiring. So as long as you've got that turned on, when you hire a staff record, well, when you go to create a staff record from the recruitment section via hiring, it will then be able to transfer any documents you have coming over from there, from the recruitment to the new staff member. Yes, as long as you've got that turned on, it can do that for you. But if you didn't want that happening, you can turn that off. I believe by default it might be turned off. I would double check that. Again, that's just in the system configuration up in the top right corner on the menu there. But so hopefully that answers that question there. Yes. That is everyone's questions so far I've gone through. So give you all moments. If you want to ask any more questions, you can do. Or say, if you've had your questions answered, you don't have to stick around. You can always drop in and out however you want. But we will be here until 3 o'clock to answer any other questions that people might have. Yes, feel free to stick around, or say, feel free to get a move on. It's up to you. But any other questions people got, feel free to have a think and ask away. Oh, that's a very good question. Is this training getting recorded? This session is being recorded. Yes. So with it should go onto our YouTube channel. Once we've kind of got it processed from our end. So yes, it is being recorded. Don't panic. On there. Yes, the recording will be sent out for any attendees that are signed up for it, so you'll be able to watch that over again once it has been, I think, concluded today. All right, that's the question. It's contracted hours for our staff are recorded in the system with breaks already deducted. Okay, however, the proposed report is currently showing the full shift length as 12 hours. Is there a way to amend this so the report accurately reflects the net working hours? The short answer for that is no, I'm afraid. The way the rota works with CoolCare is it does it based on the gross hours. So I say it won't have any break deductions applied with the rota shifts. Let's say there will always be just, let's say, 12 hours in there in that case on my shifts typically with that. So yes, because of the way CoolCare works with the break deductions, they are applied at the point of the timesheet. Once people have clocked in and out and done their shift, that's when it then checks to see if it should deduct a break and what those breaks should be. So it can't take them off the rota. It can only do that from the timesheet once the shift has actually been done. Because of that, as I say, the rota only works by the gross hours rather than the net with breaks deducted from them. Unfortunately, there's not really a way around that from CoolCare itself, but to say if you're using the reporting options and they go out to Excel, they can be obviously overridden in Excel itself, which obviously is a bit of an extra step on its own, but the option is there with it being, say, Excel reports. But yes, in terms of setting wise and the way CoolCare works, it can't unfortunately just work out those itself. As I say, with the way break deductions work, it will always be the gross hours from the rota. Hopefully that answers that question. And so I understand might be the question you want, well, the answer you might have wanted, but hopefully that does make sense on why it does it the way it does on there. Once again, any more questions anyone does think of, I think you can take your time to think of anything else. So can we advise on how to set up the staff portal? Well, in terms of setting up the staff portals, technically it's already set up as soon as you start using CoolCare. With that, it'll be set up and ready to go, ready to use. If using the rotas on CoolCare, so that's the main bit it's looking at. So as long as you have your rotas on the system, in terms of setup, the staff portal will be set up and ready to use. The main thing is once it's created, you need to get your staff members on the staff portal. So with that, every staff record you've got, if you go to their staff record, you'll find, if you go to HR and employment details, under there, there'll be a couple of grayed out boxes for the portal registration code and username. The main thing you need to give the staff members is that portal registration code, that one there, alongside, give me 1 second, you need to give them that portal registration code alongside the link to access the staff portal. Now, the link to access the portal is unique for each system, so my training one would obviously work for you guys. If you need that link for the portal, you can quickly ask our support team. They'll be able to find that information for you if anyone in the company needs it or doesn't have it to hand. But essentially, you'd give them the link for the portal, give them that portal registration code, and actually, if I show you, we might as well. We can have a look at it. As I say, the link to access the portal is unique for each system, so what I'm using for mine will be slightly different to the ones you guys would use. But it's app.coolcare.co.uk / then the unique bit, which is typically your company name, but as I say, our support team can confirm that for you, and / portal at the end. It gets into this page here. For the first time using it, they would then go register here, and they can pop in that code that you would give them from the portal, from their staff record, and next again on there, they will give them their username, which usually first name dot surname, and they can then create their own password. And the staff portal can be accessed on mobiles, tablets, whatever they use to access the internet. So as long as the staff members can get on a web page, they can get on the staff portal and get logged in. Yeah, in terms of setup, all the staff portal is really doing is pulling information from CoolCare that's already in there. So once your staff members are logged in, as long as they've got shifts on the rota, hours on the timesheet, they'll be able to see all of that in there just by looking at on here. And they can interact with it in a couple of ways in terms of the shifts available on the rota and holiday requests they can put into your calendar as well. Yeah, again, it's just on the staff record, it's under HR, employment details. The registration code is the main thing you need to give them alongside the link to the portal, which again, even if your company has, you can have it to hand, or if not, our support team can get those details if you need it. Yes, that's the portal sign up. We have one. Oh, resident inquiry. How do we deactivate an inquiry? Again, another good question. So in our inquiries, yes, we can deactivate them if we need to, which would be for a number of reasons. And there's a couple of ways it can be done. So I'm going to create a brand new, just blank inquiry, which I can do locally on here. And we can show you how to deactivate it if we need to. So just go, no, complete inquiry. It's completely empty. Nothing's on it. That's fine. There's a couple of ways the inquiry can be deactivated. Firstly, you can deactivate it manually using the status button at the top with this. It's a red box. This box will tell you about the tasks that are coming up, anything that's overdue, and the current status of the inquiry, which by default will be active to start with, or if you're at the assessment stage, it'll be waiting list unassessed or assessed till it's been done. You can click that little pencil icon next to where it says active on here, and there you can see you can deactivate the inquiry using that button there. As it says, that will delete any pending or incomplete tasks. So any tasks that are just outstanding, they'll be deleted from there and removed. And so that just ends, we can't go any further with that inquiry. So we deactivate it and just put it away essentially on there. Alternatively on that, you can also put it on hold, which is kind of putting it to one side temporarily. If it's one that, you might want to come back to at a later date, you can put it on hold, which just puts it in a different list from those that have been deactivated. So you can do it through there. Alternatively, it can be deactivated automatically if you do certain things on the inquiry itself. Specifically at the assessment or admission stage, if you go in the add entry and say that the inquiry has chosen to decline the assessments, it will then, as it says there, it will tell you that will deactivate the inquiry. Or even if the assessment is done and then you show that, if I pop it in here, just need to pop in some dates so we can have a look at it properly. When you are completing the inquiry, if you say that you cannot meet the resident's needs, it will ask a reason why. And again, selecting no would also deactivate the inquiry. This is one you can't go any further with from there. And lastly, on the admission stage itself, again, adding the entry, if it declines the admission, if they choose to decline the admission, change their mind, that will also deactivate the inquiry as well from there. When you do deactivate it, if you do it through those or through the status, whichever way you do it, when it is inactive, there'll be an extra drop down that appears for the inactive reason, asking you why it's been made inactive and different options on there for why, the prospective residents may have chosen to go elsewhere or decided not to come into the home in the end. Different options regarding that. Once they are made inactive, they'll be, they'll no longer show in your inquiries list, but you can, if you need to filter it to find any inactive ones. Using the inquiry status filter there, you can change that to look for any that are inactive or on hold as well for using that. And you can see them in there if you need to. So if you ever need to check anything that is inactive, you can still find them in there and see why they were made inactive, all the reasons we found through that. And even if it's on hold or whatever, you can then reactivate it if they actually come back to them and say, actually, yes, we are still interested. You can reactivate it if it is made inactive or on hold as well. But yeah, that's how you can deactivate them through that. Let's say either manually or it can be done automatically if they decline different stuff on there as well. So that's the inquiries. Yeah, I'll give you a moment to think of any more questions if you do have any more. Like I say, if not, feel free to don't feel free to don't feel like you have to stay. You can always drop out if you need to. And like I say, the recording will be sent out for anyone that wants to watch it over after this is complete. If you do have more questions, of course, feel free to type them up. you know, if you create a new shift on Rota, will it delete the previous shift amended on the Rota? Not quite sure what we mean by that. You can't override a shift in the Rota if that's what you're talking about. Any shifts you've got in here that are either assigned to someone or not, you can't just say override that Rota with a new shift, with that shift itself. If you needed to replace a shift on the Rota, you can delete it and add in a new shift in its place just by deleting the one that's there. And then you've got an empty space to add in a brand new shift on the Rota if you need to. With that as an ad hoc one or one of the regular ones in there. Or alternatively, you might be just talking about the Rota setup, creating a new shift pattern on there, for example, with that. If you create a new shift pattern on the Rota, can it delete previous amended shifts? No, is the short answer, essentially. If you make changes to your Rota, to your live Rota on here, and then actually change something in your Rota setup, it's not going to override any changes you've made in that sense. When you apply the changes, it does say there, any manually added shifts in your Rota, so like I say, if you deleted one, added it back in, it's not going to change that one. Any extra shifts you've added in, it's not going to delete those or anything like that. The only thing it might that it can do is if you've got a shift that's been deleted from the Rota because you don't need it for that date, and you then go to update your Rota setup and apply that, it can put in those deleted shifts back into the Rota. So just to show you as an example, if I were to use one of these shift patterns as an example here and delete, say, today's shift for Julia, delete that from there. That will remove that shift from my Rota for today. If I then go to update my Rota setup in here and apply the changes, we'll undo it from the earliest date we can. And if I create that Rota, it will kind of reapply the shift pattern that was in there, and there it puts the shift back in that we originally deleted. So if you're deleting shifts and then from shift patterns or whatever, and then reapplying your changes, it can delete those. It can put back in those deleted shifts. But anything new you add in that's kind of on top of them, or any shifts you've updated, it's going to keep those manually added ones in there. As you can see, that 8while8 one that I added in as an extra one is still there. That's not been deleted. So it shouldn't delete anything, but it can add stuff back in if it's been deleted on there. But that answers that question and makes sense. But yes, applying the Rota setup should never delete anything from the live Rota unless it's part of a shift pattern where you've changed it and obviously it needs deleting from it. But anything new that's been added in manually will not get deleted from the live version. So I hope that answers that question. All right, then I think we're going to wrap things up in a minute since the questions have dried up. At least you've all hopefully answered everything you can think of. On this, even a last chance to ask any of us if you do think of anything on that. And yes, we'll make sure I say that the email, the recording is emailed out for you guys to watch over if you need to. It was sent out to all the attendees for you to then feel free to share, of course, with anyone. That's yes. And just to wrap up, if you need any extra help on CoolCare, you can find on our menu, you've got the user guides on all parts of the system. Anything you want to know about, you can find through there. So remind yourself or learn about anything else on CoolCare. Or if you do have any more questions, of course, as things come up when you're using the system, you can always ask our support team. They're always on hand to help you out with anything you think of, just using the chat option on there. You can start a chat with them and they can answer anything you think of from there. That's all. If you do want any further training, you can always email us, training@coolcare.co.uk, and we can see what training you have available to use up. You may have some training typically to use up. Might be half-an-hour sessions you've got available as part of your CoolCare subscription, so you can take advantage of those and have any further training if you want it. But let's see. For today, I think we're going to wrap up there since the questions have stopped coming, and we can thank you all for coming and have a nice rest of your afternoon, and hopefully have a nice weekend as well. So thank you for joining me, and do have a nice day.